Folks, you'll be devastated by what they have in store for us this fall. And I want to be very specific about who they is, because this one is not Washington. This one is closer to home than that. In the first 6 months of 2026 alone, American utility companies filed requests with state regulators for $18.6 billion in rate increases. That is on pace to blow past the $31 billion they requested in all of 2025, which itself was more than double the $15 billion in 2024. And here is the part that stopped me cold. Nearly half of the increases they asked for in 2025 had still not been approved as of early this year, which means a wave of increases that were already granted has not shown up on your bill yet. The head of the utility watchdog PowerLines said it out loud. A lot of these increases have not actually hit people's wallets yet. They are coming this fall. On top of property tax bills that in some counties went up 19% this year after going up 23% the year before. On top of a heating aid program whose entire federal staff was fired. Sit down. Let me show you what is actually coming. Utility companies asked for $18.6 billion in rate hikes in 6 months, and most of it hasn't hit you yet. Let's start with the single biggest thing nobody is warning you about, and I mean that literally. This gets almost no coverage on national news because it happens in state regulatory proceedings, in hearing rooms, in filings that are hundreds of pages long, and it is dead boring right up until the moment it lands on your kitchen table as a bill you cannot pay. Here is how this actually works, and you need to understand the mechanism to understand why the timing is so brutal. A utility company cannot just raise your rates. It has to file what is called a rate case with your state's Public Utility Commission. The company submits testimony, exhibits, and cost justifications. Consumer advocates and industrial customers intervene. There are hearings, and eventually the commission issues an order approving some portion of what was requested. That entire process typically takes 9 to 18 months from filing to the new rates showing up on your bill. 9 to 18 months. Write that down because it is the whole story. Now look at the numbers. In 2024, American utilities requested about $15 billion in rate increases. In 2025, they requested $31 billion, more than double. And in just the first quarter of 2026, they requested $9.4 billion. By the halfway point of this year, the total for 2026 stood at $18.6 billion, which puts it on pace to exceed even the record-shattering 2025 figure. But the requests are not the story. The lag is the story. As of early 2026, nearly half of the increases requested during 2025 had not yet been approved. Charles Hua, who runs the utility watchdog organization PowerLines, put it about as plainly as anyone could. These increases, a lot of them have not actually hit people's wallets yet. So in 2026, utility bills will likely continue to rise, barring some major sweeping action. Read that again slowly. The bills you have been complaining about all year, the ones that already feel unaffordable, do not yet reflect roughly half of what was approved from the 2025 filings. The pipeline is full, and rate orders from cases filed in early and mid-2025 come into effect over the back half of 2026, which means autumn, which means precisely when you turn the heat on. And the increases we have already absorbed were not small. Federal analysis suggests residential electricity rates rose 10.2% between March 2025 and March 2026. Another federal read showed a 7.3% jump between April 2025 and April 2026. Retail electricity prices rose 7% during 2025 alone and are up nearly 40% since 2021, which makes this decade the fastest period of electricity price growth on record. Not the fastest in 20 years, on record. And the national average hides how brutal it is regionally. In 2025, rates rose 26.3% in Washington, the 600th, 18.9% in Pennsylvania, 16.3% in Rhode Island. Some regions have seen annual increases of more than 25%. In Pennsylvania, PPL's price to compare, which is the generation rate residential customers pay, is up roughly 66% since 2020 and hit 19.2 cents per kilowatt hour in 2026. So what does that do to a real household? Take a home using 1,000 kilowatt hours a month, which is roughly the national average. At 12 cents, that is $120. At 19.2 cents, it is $192. That is $72 a month, $864 a year, on electricity alone for the same exact usage. You did not turn on more lights. You did not buy new appliances. The rate moved, and the strain is already measurable. A Consumer Reports survey of over 2,000 American adults found that energy bills were straining the finances of 68% of respondents. 84% said they were at least somewhat concerned that energy costs would become an increased burden going forward. A follow-up survey found many Americans had already paid utility bills late in the preceding 6 months because of financial pressure. Democrats on the Joint Economic Committee, using Department of Energy data, calculated that households paid on average $100 to $110 more for electricity in a single year, and that was before the backlog of pending rate cases started clearing. Now here is what you actually do about it. And some of these genuinely work. First, call your utility and ask specifically about budget billing or level pay. This does not lower your total cost, but it averages your annual bill into 12 equal monthly payments, which means you do not get destroyed by a $400 January bill. Most utilities offer it, and most customers do not know it exists. Second, ask directly whether your utility offers a low-income rate discount, a percentage of income payment plan, or an arrearage forgiveness program. Many do. They are frequently underused, and eligibility is often broader than people assume. Third, if you are in a state with energy choice like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Texas, Illinois, or several others, you can shop your generation supply separately from your delivery. In Pennsylvania, that is done through P-Power Switch. Shopping does not always save money, so compare carefully against your utility's price to compare. But if you have never checked, you may be leaving real money on the table. Fourth, ask your utility for a free or subsidized home energy audit. Most run these programs because reducing demand is cheaper for them than building generation, and the audit often comes with free LED bulbs, weather stripping, and sometimes insulation rebates. And fifth, and this is the one nobody does, look up whether there is an open rate case in your state right now. Public Utility Commission proceedings accept public comment. Your comment goes in the docket. It takes 15 minutes, and it is the only point in this entire process where an ordinary person has any input at all. The Federal Heating Assistance Program had its entire staff fired, and states are flying blind. Now here is the one that genuinely worries me the most, because it involves the people who have the least margin and the least ability to absorb what is coming. There is a federal program called LIHEAP, the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program. It has existed for decades. It helps low-income households, elderly people on fixed incomes, disabled Americans, and families with young children pay their heating bills in the winter and in some states their cooling bills in summer. It is not a large program by federal standards. It serves roughly 6 million households a year. And for many of those households, it is the difference between having heat and not having heat. On April 1, 2025, the entire LIHEAP program staff at the Department of Health and Human Services was fired. The whole team, and the administration subsequently proposed eliminating the program's funding entirely in the fiscal year 2026 budget. That proposal triggered bipartisan pushback on Capitol Hill, and I want to be accurate and fair about the outcome because the outcome matters. Both chambers produced HHS spending bills that increased LIHEAP funding rather than eliminating it. The program ultimately received $4.045 billion for fiscal 2026, which was actually a $20 million increase over the prior year. So the money is there, but the federal staff was never rehired. Think carefully about what that means operationally. LIHEAP is a block grant program. Federal money flows to state agencies, and those state agencies run the actual programs, process the applications, determine eligibility, and issue the benefits. And the federal staff whose job it was to provide guidance, training, technical assistance, and program oversight to those state agencies does not exist anymore. As the National Energy Assistance Directors Association put it, states are expected to run their programs with no federal training or guidance, and without HHS staff, the potential remains for future delays in funding. So you have money appropriated but no institutional apparatus to move it efficiently. And when a state agency hits a problem, an eligibility question, a data system failure, a disbursement issue, there is no one at the federal level to call. Now stack that against the cost picture. NEAD estimates home heating costs will be up 11% this winter, driven by the rate increases we just discussed. Their assessment of what that means for families is blunt. Families may be forced to choose between energy and food, medicine, or other necessities. And we already saw a preview of how badly this can go. During the last federal government shutdown, LIHEAP distribution was disrupted, and officials in multiple states said outright they would have to delay payments. Some states scrambled. Pennsylvania worked directly with utilities to make sure LIHEAP recipients would not get shut off for non-payment. Officials in Alaska, Massachusetts, Maine, Vermont, and Connecticut said they could move money around, including tapping unspent LIHEAP funds from the prior year to bridge the gap. Those were creative, competent responses by state officials under pressure. But notice that every one of them was an improvisation, and improvisations depend on having slack. Prior year unspent funds are a one-time cushion. You cannot tap them twice. And here is the piece that ties it to your neighbors, even if you never qualify for $1 of LI heat. When assistance is delayed and heating costs jump 11%, what rises is arrearages, meaning unpaid utility balances. NESA specifically warned that if LI heat funds are delayed, arrearages across the country could increase dramatically. Utility arrearages do not stay with the customer who cannot pay. Utilities recover uncollectible accounts through their rate base, which means they get spread across everybody else's bill in the next rate case. So a neighbor who cannot pay in January becomes a line item in your rate the following year. Here is what to do. And please, if you know someone who might qualify, actually forward this to them. Apply for LI HEP in September or early October, not December. Funds are distributed on a first-come basis in most states, and they run out. Do not wait for a crisis. Second, understand that LI HEP has two components most people do not know about: regular heating assistance and a crisis component for households facing imminent shutoff or already out of fuel. They are separate applications in many states, and you can receive both. Third, ask about the Weatherization Assistance Program, which is a separate federal program that pays for insulation, air sealing, and furnace repair or replacement at no cost to qualifying households. That one permanently reduces your bills rather than paying them once. Fourth, know your state's winter shutoff moratorium rules. Many states prohibit utilities from disconnecting heat during specified winter months or below specified temperatures, but the protections vary enormously, and some require you to affirmatively notify the utility or enroll in a payment plan to qualify. Look yours up now. And fifth, if you are behind, call the utility before they call you. Arrearage forgiveness and payment plan programs almost always require the customer to initiate contact, and the terms available to someone who calls proactively in October are dramatically better than the terms available to someone who is already in the shutoff queue in January. Property tax bills are arriving with back-to-back double-digit increases in the same counties. All right, let's talk about the bill that arrives in the fall and winter that most people forget is coming until it shows up, and that has quietly become one of the most aggressive cost increases hitting American households. Property taxes. And I want to give you real specific documented examples rather than vague generalities, because the specifics are what make this land. Delaware County, Pennsylvania. County Council approved a 19% property tax increase for 2026. That came on top of a 23% increase the prior year. 2 consecutive years of double-digit hikes. For a homeowner with an average assessment of $255,000, the 2026 increase alone added about $188 a year, and the prior year's increase had added about $184. The budget passed 4-1. Only about 24 residents attended the meeting. And one of them said, and this was recorded in the public reporting, "You tried to ignore us, but we will not be silenced." New Hanover Township, also in Pennsylvania. Supervisors unanimously approved a $13.4 million budget for 2026 that raised property taxes by 36%. 36. The millage rate went from 2.152 to 5.642. It was the township's first tax increase in nearly 2 decades. And when they finally moved, they moved all at once. They also raised the local services tax from $10 a year to $52. The stated reasons were rebuilding reserves that had fallen below recommended levels, debt repayment on municipal and police facility renovations, and creating dedicated funds for debt service and emergency medical services. Harris County, Texas, which contains Houston, officials adopted a 3.25% property tax increase, specifically to address rising debt costs for local hospital systems. Santa Clara County, California. Voters approved a 0.625% sales tax increase to fund county hospitals and health services. The Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy documented that this measure came in direct response to significant federal Medicaid cuts that threatened access to care for low-income residents. Do you see the pattern forming? It is the same pattern in every one of these cases, and almost nobody names it. Federal spending gets cut. The need does not disappear. The cost falls to the county, and the county has exactly 2 tools: raise local taxes or cut services. That is the entire menu. ITP described it exactly that way, noting that federal and state disinvestment in healthcare has pushed costs down to the local level, where leaders are forced to navigate difficult decisions, especially amid growing concerns about affordability and inflation. States like Wisconsin and Minnesota saw significant levy increases, with Minnesota in particular experiencing notable hikes by cities and school districts. So when you hear about federal cuts and think it does not touch you because you are not on any federal program, understand the transmission mechanism. It touches you through your county tax bill. The money did not stop being spent. It stopped being spent by Washington and started being spent by your county commissioners, funded by the tax on the house you already own. And here is the compounding factor most homeowners never account for. In many jurisdictions, your escrow adjusts annually. So the property tax increase and the homeowner's insurance increase land in your escrow analysis at the same time, and your mortgage payment jumps without your interest rate changing at all. People call their servicer confused, insisting they have a fixed-rate mortgage. They do. The principal and interest are fixed. The escrow is not. So here is your action list, and this is one area where individual action genuinely produces results. First, when your assessment notice arrives, read it and check the assessed value against what comparable homes in your immediate area actually sold for. Assessors work at scale, and they make errors constantly. Second, know your appeal deadline, because it is short and it is absolute. In most jurisdictions, you have 30 to 45 days from the notice date, and if you miss it, you wait a full year. Third, appeals succeed more often than people expect, particularly when you bring 3 to 5 genuine comparable sales, photographs of any condition issues, and a calm one-page summary. You usually do not need a lawyer for a residential appeal. Fourth, check every exemption you might qualify for, and do not assume they applied automatically. Homestead exemptions, senior or over 65 freezes, disability exemptions, veteran exemptions, and agricultural classifications all exist in most states. Many require an application, and enormous numbers of eligible people simply never file. A senior freeze in particular can be worth thousands a year and often has to be requested. Fifth, get your escrow statement and read the projection, because you can frequently choose to pay a shortage in a lump sum rather than spread across 12 months, which lowers your monthly payment immediately. And sixth, go to one county budget hearing this fall. In Delaware County, a 19% increase passed with 24 residents in the room. 24, in a county of nearly 600,000 people. The hearings are public, they are announced, and almost nobody comes. That is not an accident, and it is not inevitable. School districts are raising taxes 3 years running, and the health insurance line is eating them alive. This one deserves its own section, because school district taxes are, in most of the country, the single largest component of your property tax bill. And what is happening inside district budgets right now is going to keep pushing that number up for years. Look at one county as a case study, because the reporting there is unusually detailed. In Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, which contains Pittsburgh, at least 25 of the county's 42 suburban school districts proposed raising taxes for the 2026 to 2027 school year. And that follows the same pattern the 2 prior years. 29 districts raised taxes in 2024 to 25, and 31 did so in 2025 to 26. So in a county with 42 suburban districts, roughly 3/4 of them have raised taxes 3 years in a row. That is not a one-time budget problem. That is a structural condition. And the reasons cited in the reporting are the ones that should concern you, because they are not temporary. Salaries, pensions, and health insurance, with some districts facing an 8% increase in health insurance costs in a single year. 8% on what is typically the second or third largest line item in a district budget after salaries. And that increase is not a policy choice anyone made locally. It is the healthcare cost inflation we have all been living through, arriving at the school district as a bill they are legally required to pay, funded by a tax on your house. There is a second structural problem underneath it, that the same reporting surfaces, and it is genuinely fascinating once you understand it. A lack of property tax reassessments. In Allegheny County, Pittsburgh Public Schools actually sued the county in 2024 to compel a countywide reassessment of properties. The suit was dismissed in January 2025. The district appealed, and it has been awaiting a Commonwealth Court decision. County Council has been considering legislation that would compel a reassessment by 2028, followed by regular updates. Why would a school district sue to have properties reassessed, which sounds like asking for higher taxes on its own residents? Because when assessments are frozen for years or decades, the values drift wildly out of line with reality in different directions in different neighborhoods. Areas that have appreciated are underassessed relative to areas that have declined. The total tax base stagnates while costs rise. So the district's only remaining tool is to raise the millage rate, which falls on everyone including the people already overassessed. Stale assessments do not mean low taxes, they mean unfair taxes, and rising rates. Then layer on the shrinking tax base issue that reporting also identified, and you have the full picture. Enrollment declines in many districts as birth rates fall, but the physical plant does not shrink. You still heat the same buildings, you still maintain the same roofs, you still pay the same pension obligations to retirees who worked when enrollment was higher. Fixed costs spread across a shrinking base means a higher rate per household every single year indefinitely. And I want to say something here that I think matters. There is a real temptation to look at this and get angry at the school board. Sometimes that is warranted. But in most of these districts, the board is choosing between raising the millage a fraction of a mil or cutting programs for children while facing a health insurance bill up 8% and pension contributions set by a state formula they do not control. Those are not villains. Those are volunteers in a school cafeteria on a Tuesday night making impossible choices with no good options. So what do? First, if you are over 65, find out immediately whether your state has a school tax freeze, rebate, or circuit breaker program for seniors. Pennsylvania has a property tax and rent rebate program. New Jersey has multiple programs, including the one now being debated with income caps. Many states have something. They almost always require an application, and participation rates are consistently far below eligibility. This is the single highest value thing an older homeowner can do, and it is routinely missed. Second, if you rent, understand that you are paying this too. Property tax increases flow into rent at the next renewal, and renters have no vote in a school tax referendum and no ability to appeal an assessment. If your lease is renewing this fall, expect the increase and negotiate accordingly. Third, watch for referendum questions on your November ballot, because in many states, significant levy increases require voter approval, and they appear as ballot questions that people vote on without ever reading. Read them. Fourth, if your district is facing a budget vote, go to one meeting, not to yell, to understand the numbers and to be counted. And fifth, factor this into any decision about where you live in retirement. Two adjacent townships can have wildly different effective school tax rates, and on a fixed income over 20 years, that difference compounds into tens of thousands of dollars. 70% of Americans now oppose data centers, and the fight over who pays is about to get ugly. Now let me connect all of this to something that has become the most contentious infrastructure fight in the country, and that most people still think of as a technology story rather than a household budget story. Data centers. The enormous warehouse-scale facilities being built to run artificial intelligence. Here is the scale of the public reaction, and it is genuinely remarkable. A Gallup survey in March of 2026 found that 7 in 10 Americans oppose data center construction in their communities. 7 in 10. On an issue that essentially did not exist in public consciousness 3 years ago, a Consumer Reports survey found 78% of Americans were at least somewhat concerned that these facilities would push energy prices up, and that opposition has translated into concrete action. The watchdog group Data Center Watch documented that community pushback blocked or delayed at least 75 projects worth approximately $130 billion in just the first 3 months of 2026. New York enacted a statewide moratorium on new hyperscale facilities, the first in the nation. A bill in the New York legislature would prohibit new data center construction for 3 years, while leaders assess the risks. Some members of Congress have floated a temporary national pause. Now, I want to be careful and honest here, because this is a topic where a lot of commentary gets sloppy, and I do not want to mislead you. Experts genuinely disagree about how much of the electricity price increase is attributable to data centers specifically. Fortune ran a detailed piece making exactly that point. The real picture is more nuanced than the headline. Other major drivers include aging grid infrastructure that needs replacement regardless, increased spending on resilience after extreme weather events, volatile natural gas prices, transmission build-out, and environmental compliance costs. Electricity prices were rising before the AI boom started. Anyone who tells you data centers are the sole cause is oversimplifying. But here is what is not in dispute, and this is the part that matters for your bill. These facilities represent an enormous new block of electricity demand that did not exist before, and it is demand that runs 24 hours a day rather than following the daily human pattern the grid was designed around. That demand requires new generation and new transmission. New generation and new transmission cost billions, and under traditional utility rate making, those costs go into the rate base and get recovered from customers. The critical question, the one being fought out in state regulatory proceedings right now while almost nobody watches, is which customers? And here is genuinely encouraging news that shows this fight can be won. In Pennsylvania, as part of a March 2026 settlement in a $275 million distribution rate case, PPL secured approval for a brand new rate class specifically for large load customers, such as data centers. The tariff requires a 10-year load and financial commitment from those large customers. It includes explicit safeguards against cost shifting to residential ratepayers, and it directs $11 million per year from large load customers toward PPL's low-income residential assistance program. That is what a good outcome looks like. The large customers who drive the cost commit financially. They cannot walk away and strand the investment on everybody else, and they contribute directly to helping low-income households. Pennsylvania regulators called it a first-of-its-kind development in that state. Now understand why that specific structure matters so much, because this is the technical heart of the whole issue. When a utility builds $1 billion of new transmission and generation to serve a data center, that asset gets paid off over 30 or 40 years through rates. But a data center is not a house. It can close, relocate, or get obsoleted by a technology shift in 5 years. If it leaves, the $1 billion of infrastructure is still there and still has to be paid for, and the only customers left are residential and small commercial. That is called stranded cost, and it is the single largest financial risk to your electricity bill over the next 2 decades. A 10-year financial commitment requirement is how you prevent it. So here is your action list, and this one is genuinely about civic participation, because there is no consumer product that fixes it. First, find out whether there is a data center proposed or under construction in your utility's service territory, which you can usually determine from local news or your county planning commission. Second, find out whether your state has adopted a large load tariff or is considering one. Third, when your utility files its next rate case, and there will be one, submit a public comment specifically asking that large load customers bear the costs they cause and that residential ratepayers be protected from cost shifting and stranded costs. That is the exact language. Commissions weigh public comment, particularly in an election year with this much attention on affordability. Fourth, find out who sits on your state's Public Utility Commission and how they get the job, because in some states they are elected, and in most they are appointed by the governor. Those are among the most consequential and least examined offices in American government. And fifth, if a data center is proposed in your community, show up to the zoning hearing. 75 projects worth $130 billion got blocked or delayed in 3 months, and that did not happen because of federal policy. It happened because people showed up to local meetings. Your county is now absorbing costs, Washington stopped paying, and you are the backstop. Let me pull back and show you the structural shift underneath every single thing in this video, because once you see it, all the individual pieces snap into focus, and you will never look at a local budget the same way again. For the last several decades, the financing of American public services has run on a layered model. The federal government funds a large share of health care, food assistance, and income support. States fund education, roads, and public safety, partly with their own revenue and partly with federal pass-through money. Counties and municipalities handle the actual delivery. The hospital, the ambulance, the school, the water system. That model only works if each layer holds. When the top layer withdraws funding, the need does not evaporate. It falls, and you can watch it falling in real time in the specific examples we have already walked through. Santa Clara County, California, raising sales taxes 0.625% explicitly in response to federal Medicaid cuts threatening care access. Harris County, Texas, raising property taxes 3.25% to cover rising hospital system debt costs. Minnesota cities and school districts raising levies significantly. ITEP summarizing the whole dynamic. Federal and state disinvestment in healthcare has pushed costs down to the local level, where leaders are forced to navigate difficult decisions. That is the mechanism. That is how a spending decision made in Washington becomes a line on your county tax bill, 18 months later. And here is why almost nobody makes the connection. The federal cut gets covered as a national political story, and the local tax increase gets covered as a local budget story, and the two are almost never reported as the same story. But they are. Now, county governments have far worse tools than the federal government for handling this, and this is the part that genuinely matters. The federal government can run a deficit. Essentially, every county and municipality in America is legally required to balance its budget every single year. It cannot deficit spend through a downturn. So when costs rise, a county has exactly 3 moves: raise taxes, cut services, or drain reserves. And draining reserves is a one-time trick, which is precisely why New Hanover Township cited rebuilding reserves that had dipped below recommended levels as a reason for a 36% tax increase. They had already used that move. There is another constraint tightening at the same time. Several states have moved to cap local levy growth. Iowa passed comprehensive property tax reform, SF 2472, which shifts county and city general levies away from rising valuations toward limits based on prior year property tax dollars, effectively capping growth for most general levies at about 2% per year, with a 3% cap on transit and emergency management levies and 4% on county hospital levies. New Hampshire is considering ballot measures to cap levies at the prior year's level adjusted for inflation and new construction. Now, caps sound great if you own a home, and I understand the appeal completely. But understand the arithmetic. If your county's health insurance costs rise 8%, its pension obligations rise, its road materials rise with inflation, and its levy growth is capped at 2%, the gap does not vanish. It becomes a service cut. Fewer sheriff's deputies, longer ambulance response times, deferred bridge maintenance, a closed library branch, a rural clinic that shuts. And notably in the Iowa legislation, certain levies remain uncapped: debt service, school funding, county supplemental, city special revenues, and community colleges. So the pressure does not disappear. It migrates to the uncapped categories, which is why you see districts issuing more debt and levying more for debt service. So here is what I want you to take from this, practically. First, your county and municipal budget hearings are dollar for dollar of impact on your actual life, the most consequential and least attended meetings in America. The federal budget is $4 trillion, and you have essentially zero influence on it. Your county budget is a few $100 million, and in Delaware County, 24 people showed up to a 19% increase. Your voice is mathematically thousands of times more powerful at the county level. Second, read your county's annual comprehensive financial report, which every county publishes and almost nobody opens. Look at the reserve balance and the pension funding ratio. Those two numbers tell you whether next year brings a tax increase or a service cut, and you can know it a year in advance. Third, if you are choosing where to retire or where to move, compare total effective tax burden across county lines, not just state lines. Two adjacent counties can differ enormously. And fourth, understand which services you would genuinely miss and speak up specifically for those, because when cuts come, the departments with organized constituencies survive and the ones without do not. Rural EMS is almost always the least defended and the most missed. When people can't pay, the shutoff rules are a patchwork, and most families don't know theirs. Now I need to talk about what actually happens when a household cannot pay, because this is the part that gets discussed in abstractions, and it should not be. And because the rules that protect you vary so wildly by state that most Americans have no idea what applies to them. Start with the scale of the problem, because it is already here. A Consumer Reports survey from March of 2026 found that many Americans had paid utility bills late during the previous 6 months, specifically because of financial pressure. 68% said energy bills were straining their household finances. 84% said they were at least somewhat concerned energy costs would become a bigger burden going forward. Late payments accumulate into what the industry calls arrears, meaning past due balances. And NEDA specifically warned that if LIHIOP funds get delayed while rates rise, arrearages across the country could increase dramatically. Here is the part almost nobody understands about arrearages, and it is genuinely important. An unpaid utility bill does not just sit there quietly. It compounds through several mechanisms simultaneously. Many utilities charge late fees. Many charge interest on past due balances. If the account goes to disconnection, there is usually a disconnection fee, and then a reconnection fee, and frequently a security deposit requirement before service resumes, which can run several $100s. So a household that falls $200 behind in November can easily be looking at $600 or $700 to restore service in February. The gap between falling behind and getting caught back up widens the longer it goes. Now here is where the patchwork comes in, and I want you to look yours up specifically because I cannot tell you what applies where you live. Most states have some form of winter shutoff protection, but they work in completely different ways. Some states set calendar-based moratoriums, prohibiting disconnection of heat-related service between specified dates, often something like November 15th through March 15th, though the exact dates vary enormously. Other states use temperature triggers, prohibiting disconnection when the forecast falls below a certain threshold, which means you are protected on a 15-degree day and not protected on a 35-degree day. Some states protect only households with elderly, disabled, or seriously ill occupants. Some require the customer to affirmatively notify the utility and provide documentation. Many require the customer to enter a payment plan to qualify for protection, meaning the protection is not automatic, it is conditional on an action you have to take. That last point is the one that catches people. An enormous number of households assume they are automatically protected during winter, do nothing, and discover in January that the protection required them to enroll in something in October. And there is a second gap that surprises people. In many jurisdictions, these protections cover the utility that provides heat, but not necessarily every utility. If you heat with oil or propane, you are frequently not covered at all, because those are delivered fuels sold by private dealers rather than regulated utilities. A dealer is generally not obligated to deliver to a customer who has not paid. There is no moratorium on a truck simply not showing up. So what do you actually do? Here is the sequence, and the order matters enormously. First, call before you fall behind, not after. This is the single most important thing in this entire section. Utilities have far more flexibility to work with a customer who calls in October, saying I am worried about this winter, than with a customer who calls in January already 3 months delinquent and facing shutoff. The programs available to the proactive customer, deferred payment arrangements, budget billing, arrearage forgiveness matched to on-time payments, are frequently unavailable or much less generous once you are in the collections queue. Second, ask specifically by name for these programs, because frontline customer service will often not volunteer them. Ask for a deferred payment arrangement. Ask whether the utility offers an arrearage management program, sometimes called AMP, which forgives a portion of past due balance for each on-time payment you make. Ask about percentage of income payment plans, which cap your bill at a set share of household income. Ask about medical certification, which in most states provides temporary protection from disconnection if a household member has a condition that would be aggravated by loss of service, and which typically requires a form signed by a physician. Third, look up your state's actual rule, in writing from your state Public Utility Commission's website, and print it. Not a summary, the actual rule. Know the dates, know the conditions, and know whether it requires you to do anything. Fourth, if you heat with delivered fuel, get on your dealer's automatic delivery and budget plan now, in summer, while you are a customer in good standing. Automatic delivery customers get prioritized during cold snaps and delivery backlogs. We'll call customers wait. And the relationship you build with a dealer in July is worth a great deal in February. Fifth, know where your local community action agency is. Every county in America is served by one. They administer LIWHAPE and weatherization, and they frequently have access to emergency funds, utility hardship funds, and local charitable resources that are not advertised anywhere. Most people have never heard of theirs. Look it up today and write the number down. And sixth, if you are the person in your family or on your street who is doing fine, check on the ones who might not be. The elderly neighbor on a fixed income who will not ask. The single parent 2 doors down. In every hard winter I have watched, the households that got into genuine danger were almost never the ones who ran out of money first. They were the ones who ran out of money and had nobody who noticed. A knock on the door in November costs you nothing, and it is the most effective intervention on this entire list. Stack every one of these on one household, and you see why this fall is different. Let me put all of this on one kitchen table now, because the individual numbers are concerning, and the stacked number is what actually devastates people. Take an ordinary household, own their home. Modest assessment. 2 working adults or a retired couple on fixed income. Nothing exotic. Electricity, rates up roughly 10% year over year nationally, with a pipeline of already approved but not yet implemented increases from $18.6 billion in requests in the first half of this year alone. Call it $300 to $900 more this year depending on your state, with more landing this fall as pending rate orders take effect. Heating. NEDA estimates home heating costs up 11% this winter. On a $2,000 heating season, that is $220. On a $4,000 heating oil season, $440. Property taxes. In the counties we looked at, 19% on top of 23% the prior year, or 36% in a single move. Even a modest county increase is a couple $100, and it arrives in your escrow analysis alongside your homeowner's insurance increase, which raises your monthly mortgage payment on a mortgage you were told was fixed. School taxes. 3/4 of districts in the county we examined raising rates 3 years running, driven by health insurance up 8% and pension obligations set by formula. And every one of these lands between September and January, not spread across the year. Concentrated in the exact window when heating demand peaks, when holiday spending peaks, and when the fourth quarter corporate layoff season runs. Add it up conservatively, and you are looking at somewhere between $800 and $2,000 of additional annual cost hitting a household in a 4-month window. And this is a household where nobody lost a job, nobody got sick, and nothing broke. This is the baseline. Now understand why that number is devastating rather than merely annoying. The personal savings rate in this country is sitting at 2.6%. For a household with $80,000 of after-tax income, that is roughly $170 a month of margin. An additional $800 to $2,000 of annual cost concentrated in 4 months is 2 to 5 months of that household's entire savings capacity, arriving all at once in the quarter when they also plan to buy Christmas presents. That is why this fall is different. Not because any single item is catastrophic, because the timing of all of them is synchronized, and because the buffer that used to absorb this kind of thing has already been spent. So here is your consolidated plan, and I want you to work through it over the next 6 weeks, because 6 weeks is enough time, and October is not. Energy, call your utility this week and enroll in budget billing so you are not hit with a $400 January bill. Ask directly about low-income rates, percentage of income plans, and arrearage forgiveness. Request a free home energy audit. If you are in an energy choice state, compare suppliers against your price to compare. Fill your oil or propane tank on summer pricing. Assistance. Apply for LIHEP in September, not December, because it is first come, first served. Ask about the crisis component separately. Apply for weatherization assistance, which permanently lowers your bills instead of paying them once. Look up your state's winter shutoff moratorium and what you have to do to qualify for it. Property. When your assessment notice arrives, check it against real comparable sales and calendar your appeal deadline immediately because it is short and absolute. Verify every exemption, especially homestead and senior freeze, and do not assume any of them applied automatically. Pull your escrow statement and read the projections so the payment change does not surprise you. Civic, go to 1 county budget hearing and 1 school board meeting this fall. Submit 1 public comment on your utilities rate case asking that large load customers bear the costs they cause. That is 4 evenings of your life total, and in a county where 24 people showed up to a 19% increase, your presence carries more weight than you can possibly imagine. Household, set your holiday budget in cash in August. Build the emergency fund towards 6 months rather than 3. Pay down variable rate debt before rate decisions land. And know exactly what your monthly fixed costs will be in January, on paper before December arrives, so that number is a plan instead of an ambush. Folks, they are not hiding any of this. That is the part one need you to understand. The rate cases are public dockets. The county budgets are public documents voted on in public meetings. The LIHTP staffing is public record. The school district millage votes are announced in advance. Every single thing in this video happened or is happening in the open, in rooms that anyone can walk into, in filings anyone can read. It works because nobody looks. 24 people in a county of 600,000. That is the whole trick. So look, start this week. Pick the one item on this list that hits your household hardest and do something concrete about it today, not this weekend. Make the call, fill the tank, file the exemption, show up to the meeting. Because devastation is what happens to people who did not see it coming, and you just did. Take care of yourselves out there and take care of your neighbors, because the ones getting hit hardest by every single thing in this video are the ones least able to absorb it.